Hey everybody, in this tutorial we're going to take a look at two separate effects using the PopcornFX super tools. The first one is kind of a dusty air effect where we're going to have kind of dust floating through the air, in particular under a single light or a spotlight. The second one is we're going to have an effect where we're going to have sort of a heavenly light shining down upon a statue or a soldier or something like that. So it's going to look pretty cool. We have a lot to cover, so let's jump right into it. The first thing I'm going to cover here is the scene you see in front of you here. Entitled Dusty Light. If I just go ahead and press Shift S to simulate this, you can see that we have some dust particles kind of floating, in particular under this single light here. Now you're probably wondering, what kind of cool background scene is this? Well, actually it's just a single picture. If we press Control Shift and P to open up our project settings here, you can see I've just activated a single image. So this is a single background image, okay? And you can import in your own, whatever you want. If I press Control G, you can see our grid, okay? So it doesn't have anything to do with the actual image, but we're just going to kind of simulate that effect, all right? So I already have that one emitter laid out here. I'm going to just delete that for now. And we're going to start from scratch by going over to our Set tab here, Particle folder, PopcornFX Super Tools, and we're going to load in a texture emitter, right? Let's just bring it into the middle of our scene there. Right on. So if you recall with the texture emitter, the first thing that happens if you press Shift S to simulate is you'll shoot off a bunch of numbers into the sky. And that's because in the PopcornFX tab, down here we are using the additive blend mode. We're using a sprite atlas, which means we're using this 32 with the texture, the numbers all right here. So we're shooting off random numbers into the sky. We're going to keep the numbers for a moment here, and we're going to just change the volume. Okay, so we're going to start from the top basically. All right, so we're going to change our emission volume. Okay, we're going to change it to maybe if I press the W hotkey, rather 200 first on the x-axis, since we're already over there, and maybe we'll go 160 on the y and maybe 200 on the z-axis. If I press if I select my gizmo there and I press select the dummy there, I press the W hotkey, you can see which axes are in play here. So let's go back to our PopcornFX tab and simulate one more time. Okay, so now we're simulating, and this kind of area. Now, if we want, we can actually move the emitter down if we feel those, particles are going too high, or we can move it up a little bit. But I'm just going to leave it basically where it is because we're going to just change the direction, basically, of these particles. So just imagine these are floating dust particles instead of numbers. We're going to change that in just a moment. But let's first of all take a look at the direction we're going here. So we're going at one value of 1 on the z-axis here. Let's change that back down to 0 here. And what's going to happen? We're going to have no directional force. They're just going to kind of slowly float down into the ground there. Okay, so we're not using direction at all. We're going to put a little bit of spread on there. We're going to put maybe about 0.5 of spread in all directions there. The spread ratio at 1. Initial speed, we can probably pump that up a bit to maybe a value of 3. Okay, they're not going to last on the screen for very long enough to see that really. But let's change the randomness and intermittence of the initial speed for sure to maybe these preset values I've already determined. Okay, so we're just adding a bit more randomness to the direction and speed of these numbers, soon to be dust particles. Okay, now what we're going to do next is we're going to go down to the section here, and we have a couple of options here. We can just use a regular, additive, image right here, just this diffuse circle right here. We can use an alpha blend right here. I can use alpha blend 32. Which is what I'm going to use. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and double click on the base color channel here, and I have a diffuse dust image right here. Okay, so you can kind of see there's just like some random little dust particles there. I don't want to open it in Photoshop, but it's just basically some sprites that look like dust particles. Okay, microscopically. All right, so we'll just go ahead and use the 8x4 sprite atlas. We'll change this to alpha blend. Okay, so now we're using this one right here that we just replaced. And set our sprite max to 4. It doesn't really matter. Align mode, sample mode doesn't really matter in this. Let's Shift S to simulate. Alright, so there's our dust particles right there. Okay. Now there's a couple things wrong with them. They're a little bit large and they're a little bit blue. So the first thing we're going to address is the color. So let's go to our lifetime here and change our colors. So our start color, let's just change it to gray. Mid color, change it to gray. I'm not being super creative with the colors here. End color. Let's just change it to gray. Okay, so, that's probably what dust particles look like, I imagine, at some level. Okay, now what you can do is you can change the width, height, and for start, mid, and end here if you want. but there's an easier way to do it. I'll show you that in just a moment here. Let's go over to our basic attributes, and let's change our lifetime to maybe more random values, like 0.5 for the minimum maybe, and 4 for the maximum. Okay, so now some of them will start longer and appear for longer, and so on and so forth. Now we can adjust the gravity and the lifetime here as well. So these are the main effects that we're going to be looking at. So the force, we have gravity and wind. So gravity is at 0.25, which is fine. I think that's, we don't want them to be going down too hard. We can change our wind values, however. I'm going to change it, add a bit of wind there, maybe 0.2 on the x-axis and maybe 0.3 on the z-axis. We have a little bit of wind, and wind force can be at 0.3 as well. Okay, just a little bit of wind. You can see just gradually floating like that. And the wind turbulence, let's put a little bit of turbulence in there as well, maybe 0.6 or something like that. Okay, so it'll kind of be floating in different directions. Now, the easiest way to make these particles smaller is probably to use the global scale. So we can just take the global scale down, and you can see those particles get small, just like this. Okay? And our values aren't modified too much, so we have, kind of little particles just floating around like that. And I think we're good right there. Maybe 1.5 I think is probably the ideal there. And we can, of course, change the force, the gravity as well if we want. Maybe the wind can be going a bit, downwards on the z-axis. You can see the direction change on the wind there. Negative 0.25. Maybe a negative 0.15 would be a bit better there. So they're not floating, not going as fast. Okay, so there's our floating particles. And we can add more of them if we want by going up to our emit rate. Change it to maybe like 50 or something like that. All right, now we have more particles. I think that gravity or wind is still going a little bit down too far. Let's change our this to a little bit less. That'll be floating a bit more, and change this value a little bit less as well. All right, so very, very sensitive, these wind values. We can probably even take the have less gravity here as well. Okay, so they're not floating down as much. And there you go. All right, we can even have positive gravity to counteract the wind there. Okay, so there's the dust particles right there. You can add more. And if you find that your area of the emission is not correct, you can probably increase that, or you can increase that, not probably. You most definitely can. Say, for example, we could take this up a little bit more, have it a bit closer to the light. Now you can do this as well by changing the emit position if you want. I tend to just, move the dummy around itself. And there we go. You can modify and tweak this as much as you want. But generally, I just wanted to show you how you can do that. You don't even really need to have the additive alpha blend image right here. You can also use like an additive image as well, like this. So we're still using the numbers here. If we just change this to nothing, we can take that even down even further, the global scale. Just make those even smaller, all right? So we don't even have to use those dust particles. We can just use whatever we have here. Cool, good enough. All right, let's just go ahead and stop this. And I'm going to load in another project here. This one is for the God ray. So let's just load that one in here. All right, now in this example, we're going to take a look at how to create the God ray or the heavenly ray, okay? So I have this project loaded up with this soldier looking off into the sunset here. The sunset is an HDR image, by the way. You can find it on your visual tab. If you go to your visual right here to atmosphere, you'll find the image-based lighting. You'll find it right here. You can double-click on it, and I believe it's the sunset 2 HDR image right there. Okay, so you can also adjust the strength right here. This is the only source of light I have in this scene because we're going to use the God rays for the rest of our light. Okay, so you can adjust it to whatever you want there. I think that looks kind of cool right there. But let's take a look at what we got here. So let's just go ahead and play back the scene. We got some God rays shining from behind the soldier here, kind of lighting up his back. You can see in a pretty cool way. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at how we can achieve this. The emitter is right here at his feet. So let's go ahead and select that emitter and delete it. We're going to start from scratch using the texture emitter. So let's go back to our content tab over here, particles. You can also find the sample of this on your PopcornFX learning samples under applications, texture emitter. You'll find it down here. It'll be called God rays, okay? And there's the floating dust sample that I just showed you as well. Okay, in case you're wondering where to find those, let's go back to our particle main folder and PopcornFX Super Tools, and let's just double click and load in our texture emitter. I'm not sure where it loaded in there, but we can always align it to our character by using this align to. You can also use the Control L hotkey and select the X, Y, and Z axis. And there it is. All right. So Shift S to simulate. And again, we have those floating numbers that are shooting up like this. A couple of things we want to modify right off the bat, obviously. Go to our PopcornFX tab over here. And we're going to change the quota first, the quota and emit. So our quota is going to be at 60 right here. Okay, so we're going to slow that down a bit. And our emit rate is going to be at 30. Not much of a difference at this point. But let's go ahead and change our volume as well. So the volume we're going to have at a value of 300 on all axes here. Whoops, not 3,000, 300. Okay, there we go, 300, 300, 300. And now we have floating numbers coming from everywhere. All right. So pretty cool, except we don't want numbers. We have the direction set to 1 on the z-axis. That doesn't really matter at this point. We're all okay with that. Let's change our spread. All our spread values will be set to 0 in this particular case. Okay, we don't need to worry about spread. Okay, so we'll just set everything to 0. And the numbers will just kind of start falling down here. All right. And also another thing I want to do is I want to take the global scale down. But before I do that, let's go ahead and Shift S to end the simulation here. Now we are going to use this additive 32 resource item right here in the resource list. So make sure you set your blend mode to additive, and make sure you use the 8x4 sprite atlas, and sprite max is going to be 4 in this case. So we'll double click on the diffuse map, and we're going to use this diffuse ray right here. You can see it's just a couple of randomly shaped rays. Okay, almost look like teeth or something. Okay, we'll just load that in. Okay, so we're using 4 sprites again. Down the left side of the sprite atlas there. Face mode, line mode can be set to face cam. It doesn't really matter in this case. And we'll just leave the blend mode at additive. So then if we Shift S, simulate. Alright, we got these, floating, whatever they are, okay? So the first thing I want to do here is I want to take off the rotation because our God particles aren't going to be rotating. So we're going to take all our rotation values down to 0, okay? Just like this. And we want to change our initial angle to 45-degree angle, okay? Because we want them to be only facing that direction. You can see now they're all facing that direction. Pretty cool stuff. And then we can go up here to basic attributes. We're going to change our lifetime minimum maximum to a little bit longer, maybe like 5 seconds. We want them to stay around a little bit longer. Okay, and our brightness can be set to 5 as well. And let's just change our global scale to something quite a bit smaller, 0.1. Okay, so now we have these really small ones right here. And the reason I've set the global scale to 0.1 is because we're going to modify the values in the lifetime section right here quite significantly. Okay, so let's start off with the start opacity. We want our opacity to start off with 0. Okay, so when it starts, it's going to be 0. And our middle opacity, we're going to change our middle opacity to 0.13. Okay, so very low opacities for these things. And the end opacity is going to be 0 as well. Now for the width, we have 300 at the start. Okay, so this is where it starts to come in hand, or we start to see the effects here. So the width is 300 at the start, and in the middle, the width is 390. Okay, so it's going to be thicker in the middle, okay, as it moves along, and the end width is going to be back down to 200. Okay, so very small end width. Now that's the width, and you can see them kind of coming into effect like that. So let's move on to the height now. So the height, start height, is going to be 500. Okay. So now you're starting to see the God particles, the God rays form, okay, and the middle height, this one's going to be really big, 650, okay, so now you see them kind of happening right here, and finally the end height, we're going to change the end height to a value of about 400, alright, there we go, and, okay, so pretty cool. We need to change a couple more things here. We need to change the colors, so I'm going to change my start color. Change it to a nice kind of peachy color, alright, something like this, a nice light peach. Okay, middle color can be maybe a more fiery orange, but not too fiery. Alright, let's try and find a nice orange there. Okay, good enough for me. We want to keep them kind of close to their original peachy color there. Alright, looks fine and dandy for our God rays there. Now they're kind of emitting, in a weird pattern. We have too much volume on the Z-axis. If I press the W hotkey, you can see the Z-axis is the blue arrow right there. Let's change our emit volume on the Z-axis to a value of 0. Okay, so now they're only going to be emitting from the X and Y axes right here, okay, just like this. And we can move the emitter itself up like this, or we can change the emit position to maybe a value of like 125 or something on the z-axis, and they'll start to appear up here. Now it really depends on the camera angle that you want here. You can place your emitter wherever you want, or emit position wherever you want, really. And also we'll go down here and emit intermittence and everything like that. We also down here under global scale, we have basic attributes, global scale, that's fine. Okay, we'll just keep it the way it is right now. And rotation is at 4. Good, so let's set our camera angle right here, so something like this will be fine. Maybe a little bit lower on the z-axis there. Let's change that to maybe a value of 100 there. Alright, so we're just a little bit closer to our soldier here. And, maybe let's leave it back up at 125 actually. 120, happy medium. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we need to make sure that the God rays are kind of lighting up the soldier's back a little bit, because it looks like they're emitting, but it's not really lighting up the scene at all. So the way you can adjust that is you go over here, we're using the additive 32, keep that in mind. You need to go down to your GI settings and set your additive 32 and set your glow self-illumination scale like this. And now you can see that we're starting to light up the character's back as the lights fade in and fade out. Okay, so you can set that to whatever you want. You can also make that a bit more interesting by adding some exposure bloom to your God rays. Okay, so when you add some exposure bloom, you can adjust the strength, and you can have some really exaggerated effects like this. And let's get our sunset in the foreground there. Okay, so something like this. In this case, I don't want to have too much exposure bloom because it looks kind of too washed out a little bit, in my opinion. But you can adjust that to whatever you want. And we can also adjust the values in the global illumination as well, and I'll show you that in just a moment. Okay, so I think we're good for the lighting there. Let's go back to our visual tab over here, and in the atmosphere settings, now we can go down to HDR effects. You can adjust the bloom scale. You can have more bloom and a lower brightness threshold to really wash things out if you want, to really kind of create a cool effect like this. And again, these can be keyframed as well, so keep that in mind. Let's kind of keep it something like this. We don't want it to be too heavenly in this case. And you want to have the lighting effect on the character's back without too much bloom going on. You can increase or take off the tone map right here as well. In this particular case, I like to keep the tone map on, and you can increase or decrease the exposure. Right, so you can have the entire sky lit up like this, so you can really take that exposure down like this. And you can see the significant effect that has on our scene as well. Okay, and that's about all there is to it. You can also go down to your global illumination, or rather image-based lighting, IBL strength, adjust that. Okay, so you can see his back lighting up a bit more and becoming darker. Again, keep in mind this is the only source of light other than those God rays in the entire scene. So that's about all there is to it. That's your God rays. You can have fun, with all those values, adjusting them back and forth and tweaking them to whatever you want. But that's about all I want to show you in this tutorial, guys. So again, thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you learned a lot, and make sure you check out our forums over at forum.reallusion.com, and I shall see you in the next video.